Good afternoon. Welcome to Senate Education. It is sometime in February. Today's the 18th? 17th. Thank you. And we have we don't have a very heavy agenda, I don't think, today. We're going to go through the miscellaneous ed bill, the first real draft of it. We'll take testimony next week. We will also be going through follow-up on collective bargaining rights for teachers. This was, I believe, raised by Senator Gulick. I don't think it's going to take a long time. And then we'll hear from the president of UVM. For new senators, we would have had the president in sooner, but of course he's president of a major university and has a very busy schedule. And then we'll have another walkthrough of the school construction bill. And our committee assistant has, you'll see now, added a few bills, has put down the miscellaneous bill as a committee bill, and school construction aid, as long as it's okay with you, we'll just do it as a. Sure. But if you change your mind, you can always put it in as one.
Yeah, no worries.
So,
Sounds good.
miscellaneous education bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. You have draft 1.1 of the miscellaneous education bill, committee bill in front of you. I will say that this is all based on our one conversation from last week.
Yeah. That's why it's so impressive.
So I fully expect lots of feedback and changes here. And please don't be shy if I have missed your goals or intents.
And if you have additional goals, or if there's something, and I am not, for one, married to this. This is just, these are some ideas that we've all talked about, and this is the bill that we've generated. So you can add, subtract, we'll probably move it in middle of March.
So the first section is State Board of Education staffing and compensation study, asking JFO to look at other boards and commissions in Vermont, looking at their staffing structures and their compensation structures, and making a recommendation about the state board's staffing and compensation. I tried to use some language that requires JFO to focus its analysis, right? There's tons of boards and commissions, and they're not all apples to apples. So I tried to use some of the state board's responsibilities so that they could be looking at boards with similar responsibilities and lists, if you will. So I would encourage you to think about, think about that language there, adding, subtracting, changing, etc.
And just so everyone knows, this goes back to, some of the things we've heard. State board members, at least the chair, I know, and maybe the vice chairs, Tammy Colby. I think that, they're sometimes putting in as much as 20 hours a week. Just want to get a sense of, are we compensating them the way we should be, or not? And if not, is there something we should be doing that we should do? Okay.
The second, we're on page 2, second section is a report from AOE on statewide course offerings, requiring them to look at the difference between offerings within each supervisory union on a union to union basis, as well as district to district basis, if there are large differences in course offerings between districts within the same SU. That was just kind of a one-off. I think we want to report on looking at course offerings and throughout the state to see disparities. So I would, fully expect that language to develop as we take testimony on that. Through section 3 on page 2, a proficiency-based learning study committee. So creating a study committee run by AOE, or staffed by AOE, I should say, making recommendations for whether proficiency-based learning is the most effective way to ensure Vermont students attain rigorous standards and high-quality programs, whether there are other systems of instruction, assessment, grading, and academic reporting that would better serve Vermont students. I would really encourage you to focus on that mission, the goals, the responsibilities, as well as the membership of the committee. I did the usual V's in the State Board and Agency of Education, but you may want to consider subject matter experts that are outside of state government, related to
Yeah, and if
All right.
everyone over the next few days could just read through this with more detail. Generally, the V's are on a lot of the committees that because they know the principals, they know the superintendent, they know the teachers, and we have somebody from the agency, but if it doesn't feel right, if you want other people on, just let me know. And we can't name anybody, of course, but.
You can, so I've seen things like, graduate level professor in whatever, or, yeah, I mean, it depends on, I would encourage you to maybe think about the perspective you want to bring to the committee.
Okay.
And then, you can brainstorm on who might bring that perspective, and then I can say yay or nay on how specific. Yeah. And then page 5, a remote teacher grant program. I will say, again, that was like a one-off, let's do a grant program on this.
I don't know how, we'll think about this and read through it. Yesterday's testimony made me feel really good that a lot of kids seem to be able to access, these classes. My concern was that a lot of kids from free and reduced lunch families aren't accessing. So
you're talking about the course offerings that are already available virtually.
Yeah, virtually.
So I would encourage you to take testimony on the collaborations that are already existing if you haven't already. I played around on the agency's website last night, and there are a lot of oh gosh, I'm gonna get it wrong. It's like the Vermont Learning Collaborative. They've provided the structure for the virtual attendance piece through COVID, but it was there before COVID, and it exists now, and it has all kinds of partnership structures for public schools.
Right.
So
some of it may be already.
Some of it, I would really encourage you to take some.
We can hear from them.
It's different than just having a teacher in Bennington sitting at home and teaching in one class, teaching advanced calc in Burlington. The system that is already in place is different than that, but you may hear about ways to loop it all into the existing structure. Page 6, section 5, post-secondary school marketing. Again, this is another kind of, I don't really have more information, but yet to be determined sum appropriated from the general funds, the Agency of Tourism and Marketing for the purpose of marketing Vermont post-secondary.
Yeah, and my takeaway yesterday was this, we'll talk to Senator Ron Hinsdale and Senator Kitchell, and maybe it's more about just beefing up their marketing dollars in general, but glad it's still there, and we'll dig into it.
Section 6 is just the pre-kindergarten education statute as it stands now, because, and this is to address the issue, I think you heard that currently the Act 166 subsidy for pre-K is not being able to be used across the border in New Hampshire or New York, where there is potentially a need for that. So I have not proposed any amendments to this section. What I have done is gone through and highlighted in the statute itself. There's nothing in the statute that says the money can't go to out of state. Oh. It comes within the qualifications of the programs.
Okay. So is it possible that the program that we heard just didn't qualify?
No. So I think so. The agency has given testimony on this topic in a different committee.
Okay.
And from so I would encourage you to perhaps hear the same testimony.
I'm guessing it was House Ed, or was it?
Correct.
Okay.
And the testimony was not very long. But also from my just plain reading of this, there's nothing in here that says you can't go to a school outside of the state. But there's language in here about the program having to be based on Vermont's early learning standards.
Okay.
There's a requirement that there be a licensed teacher by a Vermont licensed teacher. It doesn't just say a licensed teacher, it's specific to Vermont's licensing law. And then the rules that were promulgated to administer the program are even more specific when it comes to private programs and being licensed by DCF. I don't know anything about DCF licensing. I don't know if there are interstate agreements regarding childcare and childcare subsidies and all that jazz. So when it comes to Act 166 funding being able to be used outside of the state, my encouragement would be to really hear from the field on how those pre-qualified private providers are being approved and the specific criteria that are being used.
Remember who they heard from?
Emily Simmons.
Emily Simmons, thank you. And committee, you may remember this is a constituent of Senator Kitchell's. They've got an early childhood program that's really far away. Isn't that it? And they just want to go over the border of New Hampshire. That's super close.
I think that's my basic understanding
Yeah.
of the problem.
And you're saying that it's possible that that could happen right now, but
Well, I
it
think,
might not meet certain standards.
well, it's, I'm not saying it's possible. I'm saying the law doesn't say you can't go to New Hampshire. You can't
Okay.
use this out of state.
Yeah,
The program requirements themselves may be the limiting factor.
got it. Okay.
And I think hearing on how those program requirements are interpreted would be really helpful to
Great.
you in deciding whether or not you want to make any changes to that.
Great. So Emily Simmons Hayden, just mark her name down and we'll have her in, look at this section.
So that
Okay.
is just the pre-K
Yep.
law. You can, a lot of pages that you can
Yep.
skip. We're gonna go to page 17, section 7. There was a question about whether you could include libraries in the definition of school or include them, make them be school zones, I think is the term used for regulation of firearms
Yep.
purposes.
Yep.
So I've just made a suggestion here. So the first thing I will say is this, there's in Title 16, there's a prohibition on students having firearms in schools. And then the firearm exclusion from schools and school buildings is a criminal statute. It's not in Title 16 for other than students. There's requirements about guns in state buildings. I believe a lot of libraries, not all, so if they're in a school, they're already covered by a school. But most of them are going to be municipally managed, owned, associated. So you could certainly look at creating a new prohibition, either in criminal law and tying it to libraries. And if that's the route you want to go, I would loop in one of my colleagues who does Title 13, the criminal title. There, in lieu of, and if you want to do something about municipal buildings, I would loop in my other colleague who handles municipal law, and libraries are in Title 22. There is, however, a working group on the status of libraries currently working.
Yep, we put that in statute a couple years ago. Yep.
Their report is not due until November.
Mhm.
So a suggestion I have is, you'll see on page 18, adding to their charge of looking at whether current law provides adequate protections for libraries from firearm violence, and then requiring their report to include legislative recommendations regarding firearm and weapon safety on library property. That language might need to be workshopped a little bit, but that's one avenue if you don't want to just outright make that change now. I don't know jurisdictionally if you're looking at amending criminal law.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would be this committee.
Yeah. I'm just looking at Senator
Yeah.
Hakeem.
Yeah.
He's interested in this.
Yeah.
So
No,
what are you thinking?
Yeah, no, you can, it's your turn to put me on the spot, so. No, it's, I mean, the genesis of this, you know, the largest library in Brattleboro, the second floor is almost entirely filled with the kids section. A few librarians have asked, you know, can we make libraries equivalent to schools so that we can more easily prohibit people coming in with firearms because they've had, and drugs, you know, because they've had situations where they have a crowd of kids in this large classroom and then somebody walking around with a rifle or a pistol, and it's a little frightening. So that was the request from the librarians. But I could also see how this might end up being a judiciary miscellaneous bill.
This language, we could probably do okay with if you wanted to just, one separate constituents say,
Yeah.
hey, this is one avenue that on your afternoon committee, you could move forward with while also talking to judiciary.
Yeah.
It's just something to think about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Thank you.
So can I, why not just, say all municipal buildings?
Well, I mean, I could, but that wasn't the request from my constituent. I mean, this is a pretty specific thing coming from the librarians in Brattleboro, and exploring banning firearms in all municipal buildings is something that I imagine would be talked about in judiciary. If we wanted to go that route, and then there's
Yeah.
also the
Don't get me
concern
wrong,
about.
I love doing work that's supposed to happen in other committees, just to keep colleagues on their toes.
Yeah.
But yeah, this I think we could,
Yeah,
But, yeah.
definitely, but obviously I want to keep children in libraries safe, but there are children and families in other municipal buildings as well, and other vulnerable people, and just putting it out there.
Senator Williams.
My select board hat.
Yeah,
No.
select board have, yeah.
I think the municipality can just make that rule. They can put a sign up and then no firearms prohibited.
Yeah,
Firearms are prohibited in every municipal building.
they can do that.
Yeah,
Okay,
They
yeah.
did ask me to
We've
do
done
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we tried to do it, I think, as the select board, just outside of some buildings, but that could be because they were just outside the buildings and it needed some legislative action, but, okay, yeah, that's good to know, yeah. So we'll keep it in, touch
Yeah.
base, yeah, no, yeah, it's good, okay,
And that's it.
okay.
Thank you.
So I would say, miscellaneous education bills, all sorts of things end up in them. We'll pass this out in a couple of weeks, so we've got time. We're gonna hear from people next week, but if you have time to read it over the next few days, nothing sells, in my opinion, nothing says happy birthday more than an evening of
Homework.
it's Senator
Yeah.
Gould's birthday than reading the miscellaneous education bill.
Um,
And reading it as a family is,
even more fun.
Well, I cannot stress enough that
I understand.
there's been very little clear direction on a lot of
Yeah.
this, so I would anticipate you getting a lot of feedback about language
Totally,
changes.
totally.
So to the extent you want me in the room to hear some of that testimony, if it works for my schedule,
Yeah.
it might be more efficient to have me here, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, and Katie can let you know. We have some people, tentatively lined up for next week. So. Anything else? Beth, thanks a
You're
million.
welcome.
That was really great.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Can I ask a few questions
Yeah.
of the committee?
Yeah.
Since we have this still in front
Should
of
we
us?
have Beth stay?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't have anywhere to go.
I mean, you can if you want. Sure. A couple of questions that I had, were, we had discussed a few times personal finance and then civics, and I was wondering if that's something that we might want to think about, again, just think about
Great,
putting
yeah.
in. And then my other question was just about the statewide course offerings in grade kindergarten through 12. What, I was just wondering generally, and this is not a question just for you, Chair, but all of us on this committee, what's our goal in doing this? What are we trying to achieve? Do we want to, I know we talked a little bit about equity. We want to see if there's equity from one district to another, but
That was really, at least in my thinking, that's what I was just trying to kind of figure out is, are there areas that we need to focus on and fill holes, and I was thinking honestly more 9 through 12, but, if they're gonna look at something, it kind of goes back to what I was thinking with getting these more technology in schools, if they
Mhm.
don't have something. And again, we all sort of bring our own personal experience, I don't really know, but I know in some rural schools, because of teacher shortages,
Right.
they don't have certain offerings that you might find in bigger schools where there are more people to live and maybe more housing options. So just trying to understand if there's an equity issue around that. And I think for future committees, I would say it might be helpful just to have a sense of that landscape out there.
Well, I was wondering, I was thinking about is should we take a look at, for example, like EQS and standards? Because it seems as though courses sort of are born, of those, you can have a variety of courses, but they're all going to be based or have their genesis somewhere in the standards or EQS or, so I was just wondering if we should just take a deep dive on those before doing this.
I mean, sort of make sure all schools are meeting those or working toward them.
Yeah, or maybe just for our own, just to have a knowledge of, for me, it would be helpful to have a knowledge of those before looking at the courses, because the courses are almost like secondary to the structure, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. The only other thing I'm just going back to is, and again, it was one story, the UVM kid.
Yeah.
Gets his letter, thanks but no thanks, you need 3 years of math, you only took 2. Now, Tom Sullivan intervened and said, no, you can come to UVM. But just to make sure that we're kind of okay out there is what I'm just trying to get a sense of. And there might be another way to do it. Yeah.
I am wondering if that student had the option of online courses or dual enrollment.
My gut is no with online.
Okay.
That's my gut, only because it was, I guess there were online courses like 12 years ago, but I don't know how it was.
Oh, that was.
And in terms of dual enrollment, Mr. Bannon, when was dual enrollment? Would you guess 15 years ago? No.
Longer.
Yeah.
Oh,
12,
15.
15.
Okay,
It's not that long.
not that long. Okay,
2012.
2012.
2012.
Okay. Really?
It's not,
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
it's not ancient
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
It's current iteration.
Yeah.
Right.
Senator Williams, do you have a question?
Just one question for John. We keep talking about equity and we're talking about equity issues.
Yeah.
Does Act 60 of 1997 still apply?
So that was about funding, right?
Right.
When you say does Act 60 still apply, what do you mean?
Well, the reason it was the education,
Brigham.
equity and education bill.
Brigham, so the
Right.
Brigham decision,
Correct.
which requires substantially equal educational opportunities for all Vermonters, yes, that is your North Star. Still, substantially equal, I think, is perhaps what you are trying to understand with this report. What does that look like today? Substantially equal, but yes, the requirement for substantially equal educational opportunities is still
So my
good law.
question is, are we layering requirements on top of that original decision, the Brigham decision, as we go through our process and keep adding requirements to it? I mean, it's a basic concept.
Mhm. I mean, are we layering on requirements from the state onto local districts that, yeah, maybe you and I and Beth can sit down and sort of
Just want
think
to throw
about some of
out
that
there.
stuff. On the personal finance and civics, I am all for, if anybody wants to bring some language forward, there is some language you might want to check in the House. I think a bill was put in. And if it makes sense, let us know.
Okay.
And the civics, are we getting a report back, do you know, from the Agency of Education and Civics?
No, Holocaust education
It was just
only.
Holocaust education, it was honest. So we can talk about, we can have another conversation. We could put on the agenda, just civic education and personal finance. If there's something from those that we want to put in there, or if we want to do a standalone. If there's information we have,
I thought a few senators were working on a bill around civics education. That's why I'm surprised it
Yeah.
hasn't come around yet.
the one bill that comes up every year, I don't know if it's gonna be the same one, is the one that says, in order to graduate from high school, you have to pass an exam on civic ed. We've generally said the state doesn't do curriculum, but we do standards, civic ed is in the standards, but listen, always happy to entertain anything that anybody has. Usually Mark or Dick McCormick.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, so he's been putting it in since the early 1960s and sooner. He has put it in every year. And some stuff's come out of it, but because it's in the standards and social studies teachers do cover it in different ways. And one thing that could be really interesting, the guy at Harwood does an amazing job with civics, you know, and what he does. And I think the agency has a website for civics, you know, ideas. So we can keep talking
Right.
about it.
Yeah, okay, and the Secretary of State is doing.
And Secretary of State is doing it.
You got very close last year to requiring, actually changing EQS standards on
We did?
civics, yes. And then we pulled it back to just the Holocaust report.
Okay.
So you
We
did
got-
have discussion
okay,
about it
last
last
year's
year.
is out of control, though. This is much more. Okay, thanks a million, Beth.
You're
Have a
welcome.
great weekend.
Yep. You as well.
Mr. Leonard, it's just touching base, see how everything's going in Ed, or do you want to say a few words about something?
Come on up.
Okay,
We haven't seen you since orientation.
Yeah, well, nice to see everyone. The first time in the committee this year, so always an exciting moment for me.
of course, I'm glad to hear that.
For the
We're
rec-
talking about collective bargaining, and
Yep.
just to reframe it, do you remember the actual question that was asked? Remember,
So,
and I'm looking to Mr. Robinson because you sent us a great email, and I said, nice email, but it was raised in committee, so let's just pull this apart a little bit. Do you want to, Mr. Robinson, just introduce yourself?
Colin Robinson, Vermont NEA. It was a question about board certified behavior analysts
Yes, okay.
and their inclusion in teacher collective bargaining units or not.
Okay,
I believe was sort of the
Mhm.
nuts of the inquiry.
and Mr. Leonard, just so you know, the president of UVM will be here at 2.
Okay.
And
I'll be very quick.
great, thank you.
So, collective bargaining at the schools, there are two laws that apply: Labor Relations for Teachers and Administrators Act, and then the Municipal Labor Relations Act. Basically, you fall under labor relations for teachers if you have to be, the wording in the statute is licensed employable as a teacher by the Vermont Standards Board for Professional Educators and not an administrator. So administrators, principals, vice principals, they fall under their own group. What that's been determined by the labor board to include is anyone who needs to get an endorsement from the Standards Board for Professional Educators. This is your school nurse, where they may have their professional license, but then to be in the school, they need that endorsement. If you need that, you fall under labor relations for teachers. If you do not need an endorsement or a certification or license to be working in the school. So for example, custodial staff, front office staff, maintenance staff, any number of other folks who I'm sure I'm forgetting now. But if you don't need that license or endorsement, you fall under the Municipal Labor Relations Act. So typically the labor board tries to make the bargaining units as large as possible for simplicity. So you might see custodians and front office staff and bus drivers in the same union, even though they have different jobs. But that's just for administrative ease in negotiating contracts. You're doing one negotiation instead of 3 or 4 or 5. The issue here is, and I don't know about a great deal about the board certified behavior analysts, but in order to be covered under labor relations for teachers, they need to require an endorsement. In order to be covered under municipal labor relations, they don't. In both instances, though, their employer needs to be the school district or supervisory union. If they're employed by an outside third party and then they come in on a contract basis, that's a completely different labor relations
Right.
ball field.
Yeah.
So
Like Howard Mental Health or.
exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So if they're contracted But if they're employed directly by the school district, it's really a question of whether they need an endorsement or licensure to teach in the school, or if they don't, they're under the Municipal Act.
Yeah.
So that is all I've got as sort of the overview. Is there any questions?
No, that seems pretty cut and dry. I was asked by a constituent who is in a school who, just, it's been, different times because of our staffing shortage. And I think there are folks who've been sort of tapped to do duties outside of what they would normally be doing. So she was just asking, boy, it's too bad these folks aren't in the same family as the teachers, so to speak, in terms of contracts, but I totally understand that. That's
Yeah.
great.
So if the standards board,
She's
yeah, if the standards board requires endorsement for them at some point in the future, they could potentially come into the teachers union. Otherwise they'll likely be in the non-licensed union. There is always the potential that the labor board could determine that a particular group should be in a different bargaining unit because there's such a difference in the interests.
Yeah.
But their history has been typically to try to bring the groups together.
Yeah.
Because what happens in Vermont towns is you'll have one unit of 3 people, one unit of 2.
Right.
If you start splitting people out because we're just too small.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, thank you.
great. Anything else, Mr. Chair?
No, I don't, do you want to say anything, Mr. Robinson, about it?
Yeah, briefly.
Yeah, please, come on up. Thanks, Mr. Leonard.
So for the record, Colin Robinson, Vermont NEA, everything Damien said. And in addition, I just want to say that the Vermont Standards Board for Professional Educators does create new endorsement categories for licensure. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to assume when licensure first started in the state of Vermont, we didn't have a social work endorsement, right? Or a school nurse endorsement, which there is now for teaching.
Okay.
And so I will say as a general matter, we have, just in our Gulick's point, we have noticed over the past couple of years, there are some professional positions in schools that currently don't have a teacher licensure endorsement that we've been thinking it might be worth having a conversation with the Vermont Standards Board about exploring. And they have a whole rulemaking process they would go through to do that. And so anyways, we've actually been thinking, are there some additional positions that have emerged in recent years that it might be worth exploring, having a conversation with the Standards Board about building out some additional licensures that then would allow these individuals. I will say to the other side of the coin, and actually I think this was in the Burlington School District recently, there were some occupational therapists and physical therapists that approached us about forming a union and are now part of the support staff bargaining unit in Burlington.
Okay.
Because there's not a OT or PT teacher licensure. So to Damien's point,
Which one?
the municipal bargaining unit for the support staff, because they don't have a teaching license.
Yeah.
But for teacher licensure, there's school psychiatrists, nurses. I think in the email that I shared with Sarah Campion and Sarah Gulick, I had a page from the rules for the Standards Board that enumerated all the various categories that teacher licensure exists in right now.
So if Senator Gulick or a committee member, anybody wanted to just have that looked at, I mean, it sounds like you're looking at it regularly. Like, you'll let us know if it makes sense for us to, I mean, even in this one, he said, say, gosh, would you review the possibility of, this kind of thing for this kind of profession?
Yeah, and I think it might be worth inquiring of the Standards Board too. You could, I think if you wanted to sort of noodle that over a little more as a committee about what are kind of the evolution of public education and the professionals working in our schools with students and how licensure. The standards board, I believe the current chair of that, actually Don Tinney, our president, was the previous chair prior to his service as president of ours. The current chair, I believe, is the superintendent in the Colchester School District. Amy Weiner. Yeah. So, but they are, they go through the LCAR process, whenever they are making any adjustments to rules and impacting licensure. So.
Cool, we can talk about that.
Yeah. Great.
There you go.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And we're just waiting for President Garamella.